So thank you for coming today. My name is Monique Williams, and this is my capstone presentation for evidence-based practice for the Bachelor's of Science in Nursing at Florida State College at Jacksonville, and Dr. Susan Poole is my professor. So I am so delighted to talk to you guys today about nurse burnout and what it means and ways to prevent it. And the first thing I wanted to kind of point you to is that it's okay to be burned out. And I wanted to just kind of ask, just throw out to the group, how many of you guys, or how long have you been in practice, first of all? Just throw out your numbers.
29, 12 years.
17
years.
36 years.
Oh, wow.
50.
Okay, all righty. So has there ever been a time that you felt burned out?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Multiple.
Okay, so just throw out some adjectives that you think of when you think of nurse burnout, or just burnout, period.
Tired.
Exhausted.
Overwhelmed.
Mhm. I think of deflated. That's how I kind of feel sometimes, and just, I don't know what I can possibly do to kind of take care of inner self. So, next slide. Thank you. So, first off, the most important aspect of what a nurse does is to deliver quality care to our patients. But if we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we then take care of our patients, right? So unfortunately, in the healthcare setting, quality care goes down because a lot of the nursing and staff members are just so burned out. Patients don't receive the care that they deserve, and as a result, healthcare as a whole just suffers. So I want to start off by just saying that, burnout is compounded stress triggered by a discrepancy between employee expectations and job requirements. But what do you guys think is the source of burnout? Just off the top of your head, you can just throw out, there's no wrong answers here.
Staffing.
Staffing?
I think the demands of healthcare versus the resources.
Mm-hmm.
Acuity of the patient.
Acuity, that's a really good one. What about ways to just kind of improve it? Do you think of, is there anything that just comes to the fore? It's no wrong answers, just the first thing that comes to mind on ways to improve it.
More ways to be able to actually get a break without interruption.
That's a good one. And I know that as a nurse, sometimes we don't get a break at all. You work a long shift and you never do sit down, you're running the whole time. Okay. So, next slide. So for this particular capstone, we use the PCOT search and strategy, and just to give you a brief overview in case you've never heard of PCOT, it stands for Population, Intervention, Comparison, Outcome, and Time Frame. So my PCOT for this capstone was that in staff nurses working in a hospital setting, how does participating in a mindfulness-based program compared to not attending a program affect nursing burnout, and the elements being exhaustion, emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and sense of personal accomplishment over an 8-week surveillance period. Next slide. So here's one of the tools that was really kind of across all of my papers, something that was talked about a lot. The Maslach Burnout Inventory, and basically this was developed to measure nurse burnout. This was a 22 Likert scale type questionnaire, and it looked at the elements of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and lack of personal accomplishment. So the scale it ranged from 0 to basically you don't really have any nurse burnout to a level of 6, meaning that you are really in the danger zone, you have it every day, and you need to seek help. And basically to meet the definition of nurse burnout in these 3 areas, they basically tallied up the scores, and you had to, for example, have maybe 24 points to say, okay, you're emotionally exhausted. Or maybe 9 points for depersonalization and 33 points for lack of personal accomplishment. Cronbach's Alpha, which is used to kind of look at the reliability of things and see how things are interrelated, it was also used to obtain this sample. And basically, again, the purpose of this capstone presentation is to discuss nursing burnout, why it happens, and also ways to prevent it. Okay? Next slide. So my search strategy was as follows. I looked at the Florida State College at Jacksonville. We have a wonderful database there. access to a lot of articles that you would normally have to pay for. So I basically looked at the CINAHL and also the Health and Nursing EBSCO. Those were the databases that I used to kind of search for articles pertaining to this topic. And I narrowed my articles down for the years 2011 to 2016. Now, I actually began this research last semester, so it's kind of like a project kind of that builds on itself. So I had the most relevant, of course, you know, for those of you that have done research that you don't want to go over 5 years. However, there was one exception because it was so applicable to everything that was a little bit older, and it was from 2005, and that was the Cohen-Katz study. So next slide, thanks. So level of evidence. How many of you guys have dealt with level of evidence? Okay, very good. So the hierarchy of evidence rating system, it rates research from levels 1 through 7. And as you can see here, this kind of just describes where everything falls. Well, for me, and for this project, my research was about a level 6. So basically, most of my research came from evidence from a single descriptive study. So I had tons of articles, and I had to narrow it down, and we're going to discuss 2 of the articles, just kind of like the findings from those, and how it applies to burnout. Next slide, thanks. So the guidelines, critique, and recommendations. So I used the National Guidelines Clearinghouse to find some guidelines. One thing that I did find during this research is that nurse burnout, is just not really a topic that has enough research out there. So there wasn't a lot of guidelines, but basically one of the things that they pointed out was to utilize mentorship programs to increase job satisfaction and retention of nurses. Now, you guys have a lot of experience in this room. How many of you guys have actually utilized a mentor throughout your career? And what would you say, just throw it out there, what are the benefits? Do you feel like it was beneficial, or do you feel like, you know?
It gave me a sense of support,
Yeah.
which I needed.
Guidance.
Okay. So how often did you guys meet with that mentor?
I never officially met, but I mean, I spoke with her weekly.
Okay.
It was never
Well,
formal.
Matt talked to
Right.
you, okay.
Weekly.
Oh, very good. So they just gave you feedback and everything. Very good. You'd be surprised how many people, including myself, don't utilize a mentor, and I think that that makes a huge difference in terms of being able to work through the tough parts of your job and, you know, kind of just making sure that you can kind of carry on to the next day. So basically the guidelines were either strongly recommended, not recommended, and everything in between. And there were 3 nursing professionals from the Cancer and Blood Disease Institute and Center for Professional Excellence that worked on the guidelines applicable to nurse burnout from the best evidence statement. That's what they came up with. The literature, again, I had a ton of articles, and this was just kind of like a synopsis of some of the articles that I looked at: a meta-analysis, 2 descriptive studies, 1 longitudinal study, and 2 expert studies. But I primarily pulled out the 2 descriptive studies that I'm going to talk about. Okay. Next slide. So here's the one thing that I wanted to point. I wanted to draw your attention to the picture at the bottom. Heavy workloads. Think about that time when you were a nurse on the floor and you had a patient on a vent. I see there's some ICU nurses on the floor. Patient on a vent, patient on a tray, patient on a drip, several drips. That is one of the things that, you know, over time, that can burn a nurse out. Because even though you made, what was your ratio, would you say?
Either 2 to 1 or 3.
And having to manage them and assess every hour to 2 hours.
And the constant orders coming in and being changed, yeah.
Absolutely.
And being on the
absolutely.
rapid response team.
Oh,
be a
yeah,
team.
good team.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
You did all of that?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Long shifts. I did find there was kind of like a common theme about the 12-hour shifts, because
Yeah.
once upon a time, they were only 8 hours,
Mhm.
and now they're 12.
Mhm.
So that can kind of burn you out. See, everybody loves the 4 days off and the 3 days on, but what did you spend your days off doing?
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. You spend it resting. So, also, relationship conflict with other staff members. You can always, maybe I'm the only one that feels this way, but maybe you've seen this too. You go on the floor and you see those nurses that you really are just kind of going through the motions. They're not really engaged with their their patients, they have issues with other staff members, lots of conflict. Is that something that you guys have seen? Those nurses are probably burned out, and they don't even recognize that they're burned out. Lack of managerial support. I think a staff is only as strong as the manager that leads. So if the leadership is not strong and really sewing into the staff, I think that sometimes you can find some challenges with that as well. High emotional needs. Do you have, can you think of a time, you don't even have to call their name, that patient that has that family member and the patient together, the dynamics drains you dry before you even got through half of your day? I see a lot of head nodding, yeah, we've all been there. And lack of reward. I mean, it's not so much, you know, if you really take pride in what you do and you love being a nurse, you don't necessarily need a reward, because the reward is that that patient gets discharged, they get better, they get out of the hospital, you know, and they have great outcomes. That is your reward. But sometimes for some nurses, they need that pat on the back. So I think that makes a huge difference. So major recommendations to take away from this is that team building activities, we don't do enough of that. I know not at this particular facility. And also that increases job satisfaction and retention, and also participating in mentorship programs. That's something that I think we really need to focus on and push. And this is something that was recommended in the articles that I found. Next slide. So what do you need? I talk about this all the time. I am a big believer in taking time off, taking vacations, taking time for myself. If I need a mental health day, I'll go lay up at a spa, whatever. How many of you guys actually can say that you have great work-life balance? Just be honest.
I do.
Okay, that you, when you are off, you are really off, that you are not actually checking emails,
Yeah.
checking to see what's going on with work, you know, taking vacation. You know, that's what it's there for. I always feel like, you know, at the end of the year, if I got a ton of vacation time left over, then did I do what I was supposed to do in terms of work-life balance? So those are things that you should keep in mind moving forward when, you know, you're working. So next slide. So that brings me to the first article. All this, I'll summarize it for you. So basically my first article was the risk factors and prevalence of burnout syndrome in the nursing profession. This was a cross-sectional study. It looked at 676 patients. There wasn't any randomization. It was a level 6, and they looked at burnout levels of nurses in public health settings. So they looked at they evaluated the prevalence of variables associated with burnout, such as the emotional exhaustion, lack of personal development or accomplishment, and depersonalization, and looked at nurses with this type of syndrome. Next slide. So the two instruments that they use, one of the main ones is the Maslach Burnout Inventory, and also the revised NEO Personality Inventory. Again, Likert scale questionnaires, just to kind of evaluate where the patients were, and here are the results. This is just kind of, there's a lot of different results, but the main ones that represented high levels is once they reach these levels here of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and lack of personal accomplishment, they had high levels of nurse burnout. So that's basically in a nutshell what they said. And there unfortunately was no statistical significance. We always like statistical significance, but that wasn't here. Slide. So strengths and weaknesses, these dimensions, even though I'm talking about nurse burnout, it's not only applicable here, it's applicable to anybody that works, period. You have burnout all across the board. It was a large sample size, and they did represent men and women, because as you know, we're getting more men into the nursing profession. So it was representative here. A weakness, unfortunately, it was not randomized controlled, because that's like the creme de la creme for research if you have a randomized controlled trial. But unfortunately, more research needs to be done in the area of nurse burnout, and that was not here. There wasn't a causal relationship identified to this design of study, and there wasn't a lack of progression. What I would like to see now that, you know, our hospital is doing the residency program, to follow those people over a period of so many years compared to a group that never had a residency program over the same amount of time, and see what's the difference in the level of burnout. A support system versus maybe not so much support. I don't know if that's something, I think that would be, I mean, it would take tons of research, but I would love to see something on this level. So the second article, the effects of mindfulness-based stress reduction on nurse stress and burnout. You know, one of the things that was really interesting, I went to the National Teaching Institute convention last year, and I thought it was really interesting that they talked about a lot of mindfulness, compassionate care, that sort of thing, that we don't really discuss in the hospital. And I think it is so applicable to everyone in terms of, you know, just keeping in mind what, you know, people are going through and what all they have on their plate, and just really being more engaged in what a person has going on in the background so that you are a little bit more sympathetic, and you're able to work better as a team. But we don't do that, and we need to. This was a level 6 as well. They had a waitlist control group. Have y'all ever heard of that? It's basically where they split the group in half. Well, here it was only 27 people. 13 people were on the wait list, so basically if there was any interventions, the people on the wait list wait until after the main group has the intervention to receive the intervention. So they get all the benefits, and then they're on the wait list for everything. It's almost as if there's like a drug that's being given and you have to be on the wait list for it. So 8-week study, looked at stress levels, and they used the Maslach burnout inventory, emotional exhaustion subscale, several different scales here. For their results, they did use the Fisher exact test and the McNemar change test of association. They showed that there wasn't any statistical significance between the treatment group and the waitlist group, and there was no Cronbach's alpha used for the study. So again, here, strengths and weaknesses, mindfulness-based tools are needed in this area. The strengths showed that the idea of emotional exhaustion leads to depersonalization. We want to know where it comes from, where it stems from. This is kind of it. A weakness is that it just wasn't enough people in the sample. You know, a lot of, I think robust is 1,000 plus, you know, but here it was only 27 people. Next slide. So in conclusion, burnout is compounded stress triggered by a discrepancy between employee expectations and job requirements. There are 3 elements listed here that we've discussed several times. It is an area that's been widely studied, but it hasn't been implemented appropriately. However, I tend to kind of disagree a little bit with this, just because I feel like we still need research in this area. A mindfulness-based stress reduction program to prevent nurse burnout is very important, and organizations do put their patients and staff at risk by not having some of this available. We do have things available at this hospital, such as Caritas, you know, yoga, meditation, that we don't really utilize. And then major recommendations, team building exercises and mentorships, and the evidence from the research forms the basis of how to improve a broken system. One last thing that I wanted to leave you with, I wanted to read this for you. My dad actually sent this, and I'd heard this before, but it was just so applicable, and I needed it on this day. I just wanted to read it to you guys. And it's about not quitting. And basically it says, when things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and you want to smile but you have to sigh. When care is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Life is queer with its twists and turns, as every one of us sometimes learns, and many a failure turns about when he might have won had he stuck it out. Don't give up. Though the pace seems slow, you might succeed with another blow. Often the goal is nearer than it seems to a faint and faltering man. Often the struggler has given up when he might have captured the victor's cup, and he learned too late when the night slipped down how close he was to the golden crown. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tint of the clouds of doubt, and you never can tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems afar. So stick to the fight when your heart is hit. It's when things seem worse that you mustn't quit. So that's just something that I just hope that you guys will resonate in your spirit. I thank you so much for your time, and that's it. Any questions?
So are you gonna continue?
Any questions? No? Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Yay.